Happy Tuesday and welcome into another episode of Locked On Baylor. Alongside me, Jackson Posey from Inside the Bears. I'm Cam Stewart from Inside the Bears. And Jackson, let me be the first to say,
you are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Dogs are national champions.
You know, Cam,
Glory to all not TCU.
I've been to a lot of state fairs in my day, and you know what I think surpasses all of them is fried horned frog on a stick. Tastes fantastic.
Wow. Big news, obviously, is that Baylor misses out on the Transitive Property National Championship, which, if I'm not mistaken, you know every score of every game ever, I think would have been their first since 2016, if I'm not mistaken. Although last year, I think Ole Miss did beat Alabama. Is that right?
Correct.
And did Alabama beat Georgia in the regular season? Oh no, they beat him in the SEC championship.
Yes. Yep. So really,
could have been back to back. Could have been back to back Transitive Property National champions.
And that's
2016 was a wild one, by the way. A wild one. Baylor beat Oklahoma State, who beat Pitt, who beat Clemson. That's just a wild mismatch of the schedules. Anyway.
And this is exactly what the listeners want to hear.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, the people remember it. That was another year we were 6-6 in the regular season, won the national championship by Transitive Property. Okay, Jackson. Georgia.
Georgia plays football.
Just steamrolled the school formerly known as Texas Christian University, to the point where it almost wasn't even funny. I mean, actually, I'll admit, by the time they put their 60th point on TCU in the national championship, I wasn't even laughing anymore. I was like, all right, boys, this is enough. We've had about enough here. I just want to know, you're a fairly new Baylor fan. You saw what this rivalry with TCU is all about. You saw one of the most heartbreaking ones firsthand this year. What was it like for you watching the game as a Baylor fan? What was your rooting interest like?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little conflicted at first, right? Because unfortunately, my family is all Aggies, right? And so I didn't grow up watching Baylor. And so I had no real context for Baylor TCU. And so I'm like, oh, it's good for the Big 12 if TCU wins. So I feel like I should sort of be a little partial. And then I was also like, well, it would feel really good for them to just get completely smoked in this game.
What happened? Can you, before you go any further, can you back up your point of rooting for the Big 12? Because I've seen that a lot the last 2 weeks with the playoffs. I see it sometimes in other conferences that aren't the SEC. Explain to me why you root for the Big 12, because you're obviously not alone in this.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there is the idea of like, hey, if one of us succeeds, all of us succeed, right? When the SEC goes to the National Football Championship in 18 out of 19 seasons, that's good for Ole Miss. That's good for Arkansas, even though is
it good for Missouri?
I think it is.
That Georgia won the national championship. I mean, that's a bad example because Missouri played them close. Is it good for Vanderbilt or most years South Carolina?
Think about it this way, right? Iowa State benefits from how good the Big 12 is in basketball, right? You don't get that giant bridge built if the Big 12 is the Pac-12.
I think the Big 12 basketball example is tough because it's so, like, the teams are just good. Like, I don't think anyone's going to Iowa State or playing for Jerome Tang at Kansas State because Baylor won the national championship 2 years ago. I don't think it's the case. Football, a little bit different. I'll give you that. But I don't get so many people were like, yes, Big 12, we gotta. And I'm like, dude, they're not going to, the royal they being the major media market, specifically ESPN, they're never going to give a crap about the Big 12. They're just not. Maybe a little bit more if TCU won this game last night.
I will say ESPN does have Big 12 rights now, though. So I think that's going to change.
Yeah, maybe that's true. But like, they are always in the quote unquote mainstream media with college football is always going to be on the
mainstream media
bandwagon
doesn't want you to see.
of the SEC. And honestly, they probably should be. Like, this was an absolute advertisement for the SEC. I say I don't want to get too bogged down in the conferences, but this was every stereotype you heard: bigger, faster, stronger. The Drake told Holy Trinity, who, by the way, was at the game last night. That's why I am recording this with Jackson. They just were. And you saw it at the beginning of the game. Like, first time Georgia had the ball, I was like, these guys are getting the outside, and like TCU can't keep up with them. Can't keep up with it. You can have Kaz Kazadi all you want, but like they're not fast enough, and then they're not quite strong enough. And Georgia just bullied them the whole game. Great to watch. Did you get satisfaction watching it?
Yeah, by the end, it was definitely a little like, oh, this is just.
It was a little old yellery. It was a little
This is
old
not.
yellery.
It's not. Yeah, exactly. Like you're just watching this little frog get shot over. You're like, he died like 3 quarters ago. Like, please, just leave him alone.
It was satisfying at the beginning.
So it was. So
did you feel TCU was in the game at 10-7 when they cut it back? They had a nice drive, really one big play, but still.
Because I think by that point in the game, you saw that there was something off about Max Duggan, and I don't know if it was an injury, I don't know if it was the moment, whatever. But like he clearly was not himself throwing the ball, and they needed a perfect game for Max Duggan to make it close. Yeah. So I don't know if you knew this. Do you know what going into this game, what the largest blowout in a championship game was?
Was it that USC OU one?
Yes.
55-21 or 20 something?
I believe that one was 36. And then in the CFP era, it was 28 points, which happened twice. This game,
yes, Clemson blew out Alabama in one of them.
58 points. You're more than doubling the previous record. Like this was dominant. This was bigger than the LSU Purdue bowl game. Right? So of all of the lopsided bowl games, the national championship game was the worst. And this Georgia team is worse than last year's Georgia team.
That's just incredible. I'm still like, peek behind the curtain. I know some people still don't know this, but we are recording this the night before this premieres. We are doing it moments after the national championship trophy celebration. I'm still in awe of it. Like, genuinely. I thought Georgia was considerably better than TCU. I thought Michigan was a better team than TCU. Not by that much. I thought Georgia was probably good, honestly, on their best day. 3 touchdowns better than TCU. They were almost 10 touchdowns better than TCU. Oh man, and think of the fans, Jackson. I thought of it when it was like 59-7. They're kicking an extra point. The TCU fans are behind the goalpost, and I'm like, those kids.
And
they paid $2,000 just to sit there, and then fly to LA on a week's notice at best. Spend a couple nights in LA.
Including noted TCU fan Drake C. Toll.
Yes.
Probably was in his TCU jersey.
Feel bad for him. Actually, you know what? I should make a tweet about that. You guys are going to be listening to this on Tuesday. You're going to be like, wow, that was a great tweet from Cam Stewart last night. And you're literally seeing me tweet it right now.
Oh, I just dream about
what a moment this is.
I'll probably just have it on replay tonight.
Yeah. Sorry, I got to find this picture. Here it is. It's great.
I think one of the things
Drake Toll at this game. How do you feel about that while I'm doing this? This is a great aside.
Oh yeah. This is good content to listen to you come up with a tweet. Yeah, I mean you can root for whoever you want to, but I'm not
it's sus, man.
I'm not
I told him as much. I told him as much today. That's a little sus.
Yeah, it's
got
rough.
Some good seats. Anyway, Jackson, this is an overbearing question. In the next segment, we are going to talk about if this maybe benefits Baylor in the long run. But first and foremost, because we're going to hear it all day today, don't turn on ESPN. I ask you this simple question, Jackson. Did TCU deserve to be there?
Well, that's a loaded question because what do you mean by deserve, right?
Just asking your opinion.
So I think they deserved to be the 3 seed. just purely based on their record. But this is the reason why we can't, like, this
Definitely
is the
see.
reason why a larger playoff is going to be more effective at choosing teams to play in the championship game.
Which
Right.
which we say now is like, at the end of the day, that's fine, right? It is going to be SEC versus SEC a lot.
A lot.
And throw in your Ohio States, throw in your Clemsons. I mean, we were basically getting that anyway, but every 5 years, you're going to get a team like a TCU or like what a Baylor was last year, or Utah that kind of sneaks in. Michigan State would have been last year. That sneaks in and gets some good matchups and gets the championship game. And I mean, once you're there, that's just one game. I mean,
Yeah.
so I can't even stand it. I mean, we already saw it some during the game of how TCU shouldn't have been there. Where was Alabama? Sorry, dude. You lost 2 games. You lost 2 games. I know that might be a little harsh. That's still a good season. And you did it to the SEC and you lost to Tennessee and the other
LSU.
one, LSU. But like, you did. And TCU, for the first 12 weeks of the season, beat everyone ahead of them, lose a heartbreaker in a championship game, but their resume was better than the other teams that were. Now, if you want to argue Alabama over Ohio State,
Yeah,
I'm
that's fine.
listening to that. I'm listening to that, even after what Ohio State did against Georgia, almost beat them. I'm here to listen to that. But of course,
I
they
would
are
I would
thinking
honestly rather listen to Tennessee over Alabama versus Ohio State.
Tennessee, man. Tennessee was talented. No, if Hendon Hooker doesn't get hurt, man, that's a team that's right there. But I think that all goes back to the respect thing. Do they respect the Big 12? I don't know how much this changes it. I really don't. I get it. The only other Big 12 team that had gone in was Oklahoma, but it's the small things. If you look back at 2019, Baylor's a shoestring tackle away from beating Oklahoma in that game, and they are in the playoff. They are in the playoff unequivocally. And so, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost a coin flip away from being another team from the Big 12 that was in the playoff. You have to win the games in front of you. And 9 times out of 10, you have to win the conference championship, with this year being the one exception. Like, I can't stand that we're going to have to hear that for so long. Anyway, Jackson, you know what the spread was on this game?
It was Georgia minus 14 and
Which is a lot. Championship
and
game.
And 77% of bettors picked TCU.
I might have
77.
done that. And you know where a lot of those bettors are coming from, because they were smart and they were informed clearly. That 23%, they came from BetOnline. Okay. It's the easiest way to get into very legal sports gambling. It gives you the tips. I use it because I'm a dummy. Like, genuinely, you guys hear me chat about sports all the time. You understand that I'm a dummy. Jackson uses it too, even though he's way smarter than me. BetOnline.net. That is your number one source, best way to get started. And look, I'm always winning money, Jackson. You know why? Because BetOnline gives me some really good tips. Gives me some really good tips. Talks me out of a lot of stuff. BetOnline.net. Check that out. Official sponsor, one of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Jackson, back to it. We talked about this a little bit off the air. And it's another talking point we heard coming into this game about why people were rooting for the Big 12, and specifically TCU, because TCU, as a school, as an institution of higher learning, and as an athletic department, is a lot like Baylor University. Almost freakishly so, actually. Very, very, very close to the same school. How does this... Actually, let's start with this. If TCU wins this game, they win the national championship. It's one of the great stories in college football, college athletics history. What does that do for Baylor? What is the trickle-down effect for Baylor?
I think there's a
ideally, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's a very specific demographic of players, I think, that considers a school like TCU and Baylor. And if TCU wins a national championship, where do you think those players are going to go? Right? One of them's looking a
Yep.
lot more attractive than the other one after 6 and 7 season. And so,
or even if Baylor's 9-3, to be honest with you.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. No matter what Baylor had done in that season, TCU is going to be like, oh, I want to go there. But now that I think at this point you're sort of looking at them as very similar brands still, right? Even after the down year for Baylor, you heard on the TV broadcast, unless you were fraternizing with Drake Toll on the TCU sidelines, that TCU might be the new class of the Big 12. And it's like,
I like that you brought up this point. I like that you brought up this
they
point.
had one
I feel like I
season.
heard this before,
What?
and I heard it very recently. Okay, very recently, as in like the waning minutes of a football game on January 1st of last year. We heard the same stuff, and I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. I thought we had good reason to buy into it, that Baylor was going to be that next one, because Texas and OU are leaving the conference. The new Big 12, it's competitive, it's good, it's scrappy, but like it's open to have a new powerhouse. And look at Baylor. Look at the stability they've got, and they've now had this success on the big stage. And the recruits that they're bringing in, this is a brand. This is the time to be at Baylor. Look at the whole athletic department. And now, a year later, we hear the same thing about TCU. And again, not totally unwarranted. I think that's just a step too far. It's okay to laud them for their success. They absolutely deserved it. They're hot as an athletic department right now. They got a top 15 basketball team. Actually, I think they're just outside of 15, but still good basketball program too. Always good baseball. Like that we're going to hear that this whole off season. TCU, but just beware, guys. Look at what happened to Baylor this year, because TCU's losing a lot. I get it. Every team with the transfer portal loses a ton. They are losing almost the whole 22. Experienced guys who had played between 4 and 6 years in this program are leaving. So just be careful here. That was a long aside. Jackson, if you want to go and finish your point, go right ahead. Just be careful your expectations about TCU coming from some people who've seen the negative side of that very recently.
Yeah, I think people are uncomfortable with the idea of a power vacuum in a Power 5 conference. The SEC has had Alabama for years. The ACC had Florida State, and then they've had Clemson for years. The Big Ten has had Ohio State and now kind of Michigan for years. The Pac-12 has had Oregon for years, right? Like this is and Oklahoma in the Big 12. Every conference has had this one cornerstone bedrock blue blood type program that has anchored the conference. And the Big 12, once UT and OU leave, they don't have that. Right. And in football, right, at least on the field, they don't have that right now.
Yep.
And so I would be wary of, the first person who's like, oh, it's definitely going to be Iowa State. I don't know. Right. You could throw out any name and be like, oh, BYU clearly is going to be the class. And it's like, they might be. But right now, it's very level playing field. And when you look at TCU's resume so far this year, they were 6-1 in 1-score games. And if you increase that to games that were within 10 points, they're 9-1, right? The only games they won by more than 10 points were against an FCS team, Tarleton State, Colorado, who was maybe the worst team in all of FBS football this year.
Power 5 anyway, yeah.
Yeah, Iowa State, who missed a bowl game, and OU, who finished the year 6-7.
Sucked. Yeah.
Record, right? TCU did not dominate in a single game that mattered this year, aside from arguably OU. Like at that point, people would have been, oh, that mattered. It ultimately didn't matter. And they lost the Big 12.
It all came together. Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it just it came together. And we've seen that happen to Baylor twice now in the last 3 years. So that's what this Big 12 is, this new Big 12 is. And I know it sounds basic because you're just taking away the blue bloods, but it's just a bunch of programs that are like that every couple of years, it is just going to all break your way. You're going to have the right senior class. You're going to have the right home games versus road games. It's just going to come together. It happened in 2019 with Baylor. We didn't think it happened in 2021. We thought that was the start of something, but it's probably what happened in 2021. You know what's going to happen with Tech soon. I guarantee it. Happened with Tech 15 years ago in 08. It's going to happen to BYU. It's going to happen to Cincinnati like it happened last year with Cincinnati.
Happened a couple years ago with UCF.
Yes, those national champions from UCF. That's just what it's going to be. And I think that's the good word is uncomfortable. Like no college football fan or especially analyst doesn't want to be like, that's the team in this conference. That's the team this conference hangs their hat on. Sorry, y'all. It's not going to be like that. Oklahoma State had it last year and they didn't even win the conference championship. You know, I mean, that's just what it's going to be. And so do you think that changes if TCU wins that game last night and has that story and has that trophy and has the brand? Do you think that changes?
I think in the short term it changes. But I would look at the Big East in basketball as sort of a parallel here, right? You have a lot of smaller schools that aren't, don't have the type of, well, OU I guess doesn't have any money right now, but they don't have the type of money behind them as a UT, as a Texas A&M, as a school, Florida, whoever you want to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Georgia. And yet they're able to be very consistently competitive within their conference and fairly competitive outside their conference by leveraging age, by leveraging culture, right? And I think that's sort of the ideal of where the Big 12 is at, right? Maybe, a couple times a decade you can have a real national title contender. But to go back to your point, TCU, could they break out of that cycle? I don't think long term, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like, what's the last private school that has been successful in football over an extended period of time other than Notre Dame?
Stanford had a good 5 or 6 year run.
Yeah.
Harbaugh and Shaw.
But I think that
Baylor would be the other one.
Yeah.
Baylor would be the other one under Bryles. I mean, it can be done. That was a good 5-year stretch there where they had a Heisman Trophy winner, 2 New Year's 6 BCS Bowls, 2 conference championships. I'd say that, that was just as good as Stanford's. Stanford just went to the Rose Bowl instead. It can be done. But then you're looking back at not private, but small school in Boise State, and you're playing in not a Power 5 conference. TCU not playing in a Power 5 conference, and they were in the Mountain West. So, it doesn't happen often, and that's a good example, Big East basketball. I think the difference there was those teams could feasibly, quite plausibly, win a national championship in basketball, because basketball is a little different. UConn did it a couple of times. But I think that's a good point. Back in the heyday of the Big East 10 years ago when you were like 5 years old, when you had Syracuse, UConn, Villanova, Georgetown, a little bit of Georgetown, those guys, that was a really good top to bottom conference. The conference tournament was awesome. And I think that's just what you're going to get from the new Big 12. And honestly, I'll have fun with that. As a Baylor fan, because you're not expecting a national championship. Big 12 championship is about as good as it's going to get most years. TCU proves you can do a little bit better than that. But I'm okay with that. That's going to be a lot of fun. Is that something you're comfortable with, being in a new Big 12 where you might not be able to win a national championship? Yeah, you'll always have the chance with the expanded playoff, but you know what I mean, like a realistic national championship aspirations.
But the question ultimately is this, right? Can Baylor football ever win a national championship? And I think
it's a hard maybe, and I would lean closer to no than I would to yes.
You like really?
It can happen. It can happen. They could have a season like this TCU season. They absolutely could.
I don't
breaks their way, and then it's a one game.
But as you've seen with the one game, right? Like you need a deep level of roster construction that's on a completely different level. I would look, honestly, to.
Yes. You're correct. You're correct. But let's say you get in that one game. You have the Heisman Trophy quarterback. Their quarterback gets hit in his nerve. Colt McCoy can't play. That could happen. That could happen. I'm saying there's a lot of ifs.
You got to
there,
get to the
but
game
that
too.
could happen. I know. TCU got to the game.
Here's what I would say, right? You need last year's Baylor team with RG3. And I don't know if Baylor's ever going to be able to have that. I don't think you can catch lightning in a bottle with the whole roster and with the quarterback at the same time. I think you'll get one, but I don't think you can get both at a time.
You want to rattle some people right now? Is that what you want to do? Because I'm going to ask you a question that might rattle some people.
Oh no. Okay. I'm big into hot takes.
This year's Georgia, who you said, and I would agree, is not quite as good as last year's Georgia. Proof's in the pudding, though. National champs. They play 2021 Baylor. How close is that game?
Definitely closer than this game because of the way that they win.
Closer, but I think Baylor's probably just as inept offensively, if we're being honest.
Oh, Baylor scores
better quarterback play from TCU. Yeah, I mean, I just think, like, I saw some of these plays, and I talked about it earlier, the speed on defense for TCU was just, like, non-existent tonight. That's what Baylor had. I mean, TCU hasn't had a dominant defense all season. Baylor had that, dude. They had some dudes. Any way you kind of wanted to dial it up, you couldn't really score points on them. I mean, they faced all kinds of offenses last year. They were so disruptive. They were everywhere. They were rallying to the ball the way Georgia was defensively tonight. That's why I was like, that could have been like a 21-7, like the flip score that we saw in the Sugar Bowl. I could have saw that. Anyway, that's totally moot.
I do not think Baylor's beating Georgia 21-7, but you can.
No, they're not beating them. No.
Oh, okay.
No. I'm saying Georgia beats them 21-7, but like they're in that, you know.
I still think that's a little optimistic, but
what else am I here for? If I'm known for being one thing as a Baylor fan, it is optimistic.
That is your thing.
Optimistic.
It worked against Bernie. It could work again.
It did. I felt good about that game, even 21-0. Anyway, that's people don't even know what we're talking about anymore. Jackson, we're winding down on time here, I think. So I had asked you what that would have been like had TCU won the game. Any difference in your thinking now that TCU has lost that game in terms of the trickle-down effect for Baylor? Or just kind of the same?
Yeah, TCU, I think, definitely has the advantage at this point, especially considering the season that Baylor just had. But I don't think it's significant, right? In the sense that recruits who were watching that game, they're like, oh, this school I'm interested in is in the national. Oh, like I think it really brought back to earth that, TCU, I mean, they even showed that kick at the end of the TCU Baylor game, right? Where Baylor's winning and then 3 seconds left, that kick goes up, which is really just a kick in the heart to us. Like, that was
stray. Absolutely caught a stray. Didn't need that in my life.
But it really showed, I think, hey, this team that had a losing record was right there with TCU winning until the very end of the game, right? And so
I think honestly, like, if it comes down to this, let's say a recruit's watching that game and he's picking between TCU and LSU. SEC team that's good, right? Very good this year. Always has a chance to be in the mix because they're LSU. I don't think it matters if TCU wins or loses that game. I just call me the SEC bias guy if you want, but like I just think LSU is still a better option in terms of what a recruit's thinking, in terms of stability, especially even if TCU wins that game.
I think the difference.
I picked Baylor. I could have gotten into most SEC schools. I picked Baylor.
I would hope you could get into 13 out of the 14 of them, but
yeah, definitely a notable exception.
Yes,
but most of the other ones I probably could. Anyway, so I tend to agree with you here. I mean, I think whatever effect would have come from TCU winning this game, in terms of the other Big 12 schools, the small schools who never had the chance to get here from Hoosiers, that effect is still there by just them being there. And I was thinking about it all day today at work about how bitter I was, because I was admittedly bitter that TCU was there, that TCU fans were like getting that day today, getting that experience. You know, I hated that. It didn't sit well with me. The Sugar Bowl experience was awesome. It really was. But it's a totally different animal when you're going for a national championship. Totally different. They got to be in LA and just like party for a couple of days and go to bed thinking like we could win the national championship tomorrow. That's insane. That thought doesn't even cross my mind with Baylor football. I wish we were so close that it would, but it hasn't. So I'm still bitter. Honestly, I wouldn't have even minded if they kind of lost a heartbreaker too. Even though this is objectively funnier, because I thought back to that 2019 Big 12 championship. You were a young lad. You were like 7.5. Baylor comes back against OU with Zeno in at quarterback. And that first touchdown he throws was like one of the great, awesome sports moments of my life that didn't mean anything. Like nothing else in the world mattered. It was the most hype thing ever. To that point in my Baylor fandom, that was the best, like crazy singular moment. And they didn't even get that tonight. The TCU fans didn't even get that tonight. They got a touchdown early. That was it. But they didn't get that like, holy crap, we're in this game. We might be able to beat them. Like they didn't even get that moment. That's a little satisfying. That's a little satisfying for the bitter person I am. Pour it on if the TCU fans ever find this. I am bitter. I absolutely am bitter. Heck of a season. Would have been great for college football. Undeniably would have been great for college football.
I think if you, at this point, you talk to anyone at TCU, they will be completely and utterly dejected.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a small win for Baylor.
Well, absolutely. In terms of the last 2 months that we've had,
we can take what we can get. There's not
absolutely. Now, here's my final parting question. I was worried, and I know a lot of Baylor fans were, that this would have been the unattainable, the unreachable star. We just talked about how Baylor might never win a national championship in football. Okay. If TCU does that, they hold that over our heads forever. Okay. I know they've already won 2, but I said it in my column today. Anytime you're beating Carnegie Mellon for a national championship, there's some Mickey Mouse ears on that. I'm sorry. There just is. It was 80 years ago. No one was alive. All right. That doesn't count. Okay. They're more legit than Oklahoma State's, but that doesn't count. Okay. It was always like Baylor and TCU kind of battling for that other stuff, like not the major revenue real championships. I say real in quotations because I'll get some flack for this. But it was like TCU being like, oh, we went to Omaha. We went to the College World Series. Baylor, checkmate. And then we'd be like, we have the best women's college basketball program outside of Connecticut. Like 3 national championships, get on our level. We got the dynasty. But like at the end of the day, so few of us actually really, really care about that, live and die with that. And then Jackson, we win the national championship in basketball. And that is Tim McGraw and Friday Night Lights. Can you touch that? No, TCU, you can't touch that. You can't. And I was just thinking like this whole month of buildup of like, what will they be like if they win football? I love basketball. I love college basketball. That was one of the most awesome sports moments of my life. But everyone knows football is just a little bit up there. No one can deny that. Duke fans would tell you that. Kansas fans would tell you that. Gonzaga fans might even tell you that. Football is just a little bit more everywhere else in the country.
Love their football team.
Yes. And if they had that over us, Jackson, after just one, not even 2 years of being able to hold the basketball thing over their head, I would have lost it. I use this example with Mississippi State. Poor Mississippi State gets their noses rubbed into Ole Miss every year, even though it's somewhat of a competitive rivalry. People know Ole Miss. Not as many people know Mississippi State, right? None of them win national championships. Neither of them do. Finally, 2021, Mississippi State baseball, national champions. They finally have something to hold over Ole Miss. Jackson, do you mind telling me what happened the next year?
Ole Miss won the
Ole Miss
national
baseball won
championship.
the national championship. Could you imagine if that happened to us? The TCU fans will still try to hold it over, and whatever. It's a great story. It's something we haven't done, whatever.
Oh, man,
But
Cam.
if they got to hold that over us, there's no coming back from that. That is like what happened at Duke basketball last year.
And there's a worst case scenario because Mike Miles is really good.
Don't do it.
And if
Don't do
TCU
it.
wins
Don't do it.
basketball, that's worse than TCU
Don't
winning
do it.
football. Because
Don't
then
do
we
it.
don't have any sports left.
Don't do it, man. Don't do it. Don't you dare do it to me.
Anybody could win this conference.
I was more offended by
Scary.
losing to TCU in basketball than I was in football. Jackson,
Cam,
we can find you at InsideTheBears.com. Sports
You can.
Illustrated company. You can find me there as well. Jackson actually just wrote an excellent article, speaking of Baylor basketball, kind of dissecting all their defensive problems. I wish we could talk a little bit more about that because I actually learned something from it, Jackson. Actually learned something from your writing. I'm just kidding. You're a great writer. But it hasn't always been easy at times to just pinpoint like the one or two things that is an easy fix for Baylor basketball. Jackson broke it down very nicely. We're going to have coverage all season long, of course, on Inside the Bears, including this week as the Bears take on West Virginia Mountaineers. But more importantly, yours, mine, our Georgia Bulldogs, national champions, Georgia, a.k.a. not TCU Bulldogs. That's Jackson Posey. I'm Cam Stewart. Drake Toll's back tomorrow. You have been listening to Locked On Baylor.